The United States of America was now an independent nation that still had that new car smell. American lawmakers wrestled to craft laws and policies that satisfied the masses. Thomas Jefferson was one of those lawmakers. He wanted there to be a law that all children receive education. When he was given the job of rewriting some of Virginia's laws, he drafted a bill on how the government would give every child schooling. These were the days of rough beginnings for educational reform. In 1784, the educational system in the United States unfairly aided the rich more than the poor. Conflict grew with those who thought that public schools would help lessen the issue. However, others feared the consequences of public schooling. A child's education depended on where they lived, their race, gender, and social class. Education was widely available in the northern and middle colonies, especially for white males. Schooling was a local responsibility. Small towns with lower incomes would be more likely not to be able to keep their schools open. Schools were small and often in one room. Students gathered together and listened to lectures by the schoolmaster. In 1647, Massachusetts law made it so that every town of 50 or more families could have a school. Education opportunities were a lot more rare in the rural South. In the South, children usually went to church Sunday school, which acted as the actual school back then. Though people were being educated, children were only learning the basics, reading, writing, and simple math. But this was not enough for school reformer Thomas Jefferson. A bill for the general diffusion of knowledge was Thomas Jefferson's game plan on how he would make public education widespread and effective. The first aspect of his game plan was to figure out who would be in charge of the schools and decide how the schools ran. Thomas was very clear he did not want the government to run schools, but who else would run it? He didn't want the state to run it either. He wanted only people who truly care about the bill to decide what the students learned. Who would truly care? But if it is believed that these elementary schools will be better managed by any general authority of the government than by the parent within each ward, it is a belief against all experience. No, my friend, the way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to. Secondly, for his game plan was to decide where the schools would go. He wanted there to be education for all free children, male and female, resident within the respective hundred, shall be entitled to receive tuition gratis for the term of 3 years, and as much longer at their private expense as their parents, guardians, or friends shall think proper. He decided there would be schools every 5 to 6 miles. Additionally, his game plan needed to know how schools would be funded. The schools would be funded by money taken from the people through taxes, giving the government a bit of power because the schools would have to go to them for their funding. Lastly, for his game plan, what would they teach? Public schools at the time taught students basic math, writing, and reading. He wanted at every one of these schools shall be taught reading, writing, and common arithmetic, and the books which shall be used therein for instructing the children to read shall be such as will at the same time make them acquainted with Grecian, Roman, English, and American history. These 4 different aspects caused conflict among different groups of people who disagreed on the bill. From the 4 aspects of the bill erupted conflict. There was conflict with the church about this bill. They would lose the control they had over schooling. This was because the church and government were very entwined, and if the government didn't have control, then neither did the church. Private school teachers had conflict with the part of the bill that said public schools would be everywhere. It scared them into thinking that they would lose their jobs since public schools were free and private schools weren't. The taxpayers were worried with how the schools would be funded. They were worried because taxes would go up and they didn't want any more of their money going to the rich. This fear made sense because taxes are supposed to go to the government, but normally tax money ends up in the pockets of the rich. There was conflict with the everyday people on what schools would teach. During that time period, children learned simple math, writing, and reading. This bill made what the children learned a lot harder to teach. Also, girls normally learned household skills, and boys learned Latin, arithmetic, and reading and writing. The fact that Thomas wanted both genders to learn these things and more seemed absurd at the time. Thomas did try to make a difference, but turns out he wasn't the great educational reformer he was attempting to be because the bill failed. The bill for the general diffusion of knowledge did not pass the first time, so while Thomas Jefferson was in France as an ambassador, James Madison edited the bill and proposed it again, and it didn't pass, so he kept editing it and proposing it till it went through in 1796 and became a law, but it was revised so much it didn't even result in public education for all. After James Madison's version of a general diffusion of knowledge was proposed, it did not solve the problem. People started asking, why don't we have a federally funded educational system? Many people stepped forward and insisted there be some government-funded schooling. It took 86 years, but finally, public schools became federally funded in the year 1870, and every state had free elementary schools. By the end of the 1800s, America had the highest literacy rate in the world. Though there was free education, it was not equal education for all children. 12% of black students are held back in ninth grade, just 4% of white students are held back in 2015. The fight for educational reform continued throughout the history and continues today. John Dewey was inspired by Thomas Jefferson and continued to support child-centered education and created a philosophy that inspired many gifted schools. There was also Horace Mann, who worked to have public schools be federally funded. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson added segregation in schools. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education made it so people of different races could go to school together. In 2001, the law, No Children Left Behind, went into play and increased federal funding in schools. With all these historical events, there are still educational issues today. The achievement gap is still there. Fewer black children show proficiency in developmental skills such as receptive vocabulary, matching, early counting, math, color knowledge, numbers, and shapes. There is still segregation in schools today also. Schools with 75% more of one race, non-white race, offered fewer math, science, and college prep courses and had higher rates of students who were held back in ninth grade, suspended, or expelled. Education was not perfect back in 1784, and it is not perfect now. People's fears about public education were all justified. Yes, taxes did go up. Yes, private school teachers did lose their jobs. Private K-12 enrollments are lessening, almost by 13% from 2000 to 2010. Yes, Christianity is no longer taught in public schools. Prayer was banned from schools in 1962. There still isn't quality, free education for all. 750 million illiterate adults, and 2/3 of whom are women, are still in our world. Many people have not been given great education. Thomas Jefferson's bill would not have fixed everything, but it would have given more students further opportunities for education.